Hello. Wow, I'm here. Welcome, everyone. My name is Felicia Cohen, and I am going to talk about Eldon Garnet, Toronto's most famous unknown artist. I'm going to do a virtual walk covering 6 of his sculptures. And the reason why this presentation is called Toronto's Most Famous Unknown Artist is his work is actually quite high profile and visible, but you may never have noticed his name or who he is or these sculptures. So I'm really going to give you a chance to look at these pieces, and maybe at the end of this, you'll take more notice of your public art in your area. So I'm going to start the presentation. Before I start, I want to do a land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge the land that these sculptures are located on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So, as I mentioned, this is a virtual tour, and I'm going to do 6 of his art pieces. I'm going to show you a map to start, so you'll see where they all are. Because the great thing is, as a walking tour, I would not have been able to do this because they're spaced a little bit too far apart. So here's a map, and the blue markers show you where all the pieces are. So it's roughly in the downtown area, but as a walking tour, it wouldn't have been possible. So yay, technology! It's working for us from that point of view. I also want to mention that 2021 is Toronto Public Art Year. And hopefully starting in the fall, there will be the festival called Artworks TO. And if you want to find out more about it, it is at artworks.ca. Okay, so please just look into that, and I'm going to start with a little biography of the artist. Okay, so his name is Eldon Garnet. He is a real multiple disciplinary artist. He's a writer, editor, photographer, filmmaker, and of course, sculptor. He is an artist with great poetic ideas and ideals. He's been in practice for almost 50 years. He first exhibited in 1975, and he has had exhibitions in Canada and internationally. He has representation in Toronto by Christopher Cutts Gallery in Toronto, and he currently has a photographic exhibition on display called Saved and Drowned. That's the image that is on display here. So a little bit about his influences. One of his early influences was seeing a live performance by Marcel Duchamp when he was in Toronto. Now, Duchamp is known as one of the first artists to popularize conceptual art, and also for the ready-made sculpture. Most of his most well-known works include a bicycle wheel and a urinal, which was pretty scandalous at the time. So Garnet had his mind opened to the idea that art wasn't necessarily about the hand of the artist, and that conceptually driven work would allow him to be poetic, maybe without the written word, and in any medium. So, going forward, how does an artist impassioned by conceptual art get public art commissions? He learned the hard way that concept alone, no matter how strong, would not necessarily result in a sculpture that would be understood or that would be rigorous enough to be built and survive, especially with our Canadian winters. So this raises one of the many challenges put to the artist when designing an outdoor public piece of sculpture. Of course, others include, the neighborhood, the surroundings it's in, the materials, the cost, the scale, and probably most important to Eldon Garnet, the meaning or symbolism or intellectual properties. By the late 1980s, he discovered a way to balance his ideas and how to realize them materially. He started by incorporating figures, the human figure, as part of an allegorical narrative. So the people in these sculptures are symbolic, and we're going to start with two. And before I go to the next slide, I want to first of all mention that if you have any questions, please put it in the comments, and we'll try and get to some of them afterwards with the amazing help of Wes, who has been my technical support. And I want to thank him. And I also want to wish Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers. So let's look at some of his work. The first piece we're going to talk about is the Chinese Railway Workers Memorial from 1989. It's located west of the Rogers Centre by the tracks. So here it is here. It's alongside the railway tracks. It's called a rail corridor. On the south side, it's a linear park. So I don't know if any of you have ever driven past here, but it is, as I said, just west of the Rogers Centre and the CN Tower on the south side of the rail tracks. When I do bus tours of Toronto, we often drive by the sculpture, and I really like to point it out because the building of Canada's national rail system brought the country together, and it's a really important part of our history. Of course, much has been written about how the completion of this transcontinental railway was part of uniting our young country, vast country, but little credit has been given to those who toiled and lost their lives building the railway. And this is what this sculpture does. In the early 1880s, Chinese workers, around 15,000, were recruited for the dangerous job, and there wasn't much in the way of health and safety regulations, so many lost their lives in the building of the railway. When the job was done, those who wanted to naturalize and become Canadian citizens were treated very poorly, including the imposing of a head tax, which was $50 in 1885, raised to $100 in 1900, and $500 in 1903. In 1923, the Chinese Immigration Act actually bans Chinese immigration to Canada. So the sculpture pays homage to those workers and the incredible hardships they suffered, and as I said, some who actually lost their lives. The body of the sculpture is made of what looks like railway trestle, made of wood. There are two workers toiling at constructing the trestle. You can see one here, and the next one I'll show you in the next slide. The plaque on this slide reads, "This memorial was created by artist Eldon Garnet, winner of the open competition sponsored by the Foundation to commemorate the Chinese railway workers in Canada and the city of Toronto." You can just about see the other figure at the top of this slide here, and these two rocks. So these rocks were brought from the Rocky Mountains, where the railway had its most challenging construction. They're provided by the Canadian Pacific Railway and the Fording Coal Limited. In 2006, the Harper government issued an apology to those Chinese immigrants whose already hard lives was made worse by raising an unfair tax that was beyond the means of any working class labor, as I mentioned previously. No financial compensation was offered. This sculpture was commissioned by the city of Toronto. So I'm going on to our next location. Now we're going to the corner of College and Bay, to the Metropolitan Police Headquarters. There's 3 sculptures here. So the artist conceived these 3 figurative works as a series, which he calls an allegorical triptych. So let's explore how they relate to one another and what they might mean. So the first one you see here is a child pulling a large granite obelisk on his wagon. The obelisk is obviously larger and heavier than he could possibly manage. The words "serve and protect" are carved onto the obelisk. The plaque indicates that this is a 3-piece work created for the Metropolitan Police Headquarters by artist Eldon Garnet in 1988. This is an earlier work. So could this be allegorical to the burden of history that those in law enforcement must bear? Or could it be that those most vulnerable, like children, are those who are best served and protected? The male figure here is carrying 2 very different loads on his shoulders. On one side, he's carrying 2 stone blocks, and on the other side, 2 very thick books of the same size as the blocks. Is this allegorical to the 2 forces of the law, the written word or knowledge versus physical strength? The third figure is the policewoman. She appears to be constructing a series of steps in a pyramid shape, with a trowel in one hand and a radio in the other. Is she meant to be building her own pathway to success? Or should we see this as a symbol of feminizing the police and community building? The second photo here is shown how this sculpture was used as part of the protest during the Black Lives Matter protests right at the police headquarters. Maybe the artist considered that one day this plinth-like sculpture would serve for this purpose, and I think he would be pleased that his work would be part of a protest for social justice. So we're going to move on to our next location with a similar theme of the law. This piece is called Equal Before the Law from 2011. It's in the McMurtry Law Gardens next to the law courts alongside City Hall. Next slide, please. So with the theme of justice and the law here, location is quite key. This is a sculpture garden called McMurtry Law Gardens. And as I said, it's right alongside the entrance to City Hall. And it's actually in between the Law Society and the Law Court buildings. All the other sculptures in the Law Garden also relate to themes of justice, the law, equality. Now, looking at this sculpture, we see on the left the lamb, and we see on the right the lion. And the animals, the lion, strong, large, dominating, and the lamb, small, meek, and vulnerable. Yet they are perfectly balanced on the scale, equal before the law. The scale and platform has also been very purposefully designed in an equally symbolic manner. The surfaces are all angled, which are referencing their orientation to the law courts. So the platform is parallel, and the tower is angled, referencing their orientation to the law courts at 60 degrees. The ends of the platform have angles 30 degrees to the law courts. The text on the tower reads, "Every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination." Our next stop also incorporates animals in a very, very different setting. And it's called Inversion from 2011 at the James Cooper Mansion on Sherbourne Street. And before I show you that, I'm going to play a little interview.
Yeah, because it actually has reversed itself, it's inverted itself, because basically what it's about is the notion of the garrison mentality, which was a concept of Canadian literature. Northrop Frye dealt with it, T.G. Jones, Margaret Atwood even had a book about it. And it's in how I look at it is that the Canadian mentality is about fortifications against nature, to block ourselves from the invasion of nature, because it's a dangerous element and we're trying to protect ourselves. That's the Canadian mentality. And I would advocate an inversion to take down the barrier, let nature back. And that's very much what D.G. Jones had written about in his book of the same kind of garrison mentality, okay? Taking Frye's ideas and all that. And so the inversion now, I wanted nature to come back. And it has come back because we're no longer blocking it from our beings, okay? But then that was an irony. As Suzuki talks about the invasion of the rainforest and how we're over-habitizing nature, and it's fighting back in a sense, that we're pushing it to the edge where we're right at it, and it's bringing disease to us again. So
Indeed,
you gotta, what is nature? And well, nature's winning now for sure, right? If anything's won in the last, 5 months or a year, is nature.
Yeah, indeed.
It wins. You take down the barriers, and is that good or bad?
So that was the artist, Eldon Garnet, talking about inversion, this sculpture. And here we are on Sherbourne Street, standing in front of a historic house, the James Cooper Mansion from 1881. James Cooper was a wealthy importer of shoes, and this house was actually physically moved in 2008. Perhaps to shift it for the building of a condominium tower, but is one of the remaining mansions in the area, most of which are on Jarvis Street. Jarvis has an amazing amount of beautiful historic mansions of the ruling classes of Toronto. So here we have a collection of Canadian wildlife in this urban setting, which is one of the main themes of this sculpture, of course. And as Eldon said, historically, the settlers of Canada viewed nature as something to be tamed or even conquered. So now we've achieved this, we're starting to see that maybe we need to invert our attitudes and go back to embracing the wilderness as species extinction and climate crisis are the consequences of this very arrogant way of thinking. So let's look at the animals here. These are the foxes at the entrance. They're at eye level, so they are symbols of humor and goodwill, and the artist intends for us to interact with them. Here's the stag. The stag can be a symbol of strength, but in its reversed orientation, is replaced by the strength of invention and industry, the steel plinth it's on. And then here we have the doe, which is our cozy reference to idealized wilderness on the left. And then on the right, we have the two wolves in a mirror image orientation, which can be seen as welcoming or guarding. So the inversion can also be nature taking over, or maybe that is an inversion of an inversion. Nature dominating to be dominated, back to dominating. The next piece I'm going to talk about is called Artifacts of Memory from 2016, and it's in front of a condominium tower on St. Joseph Street, just west of Yonge. So this is a text-based sculpture, and it returns to Garnet's love of words and poetry. Although he says he is frustrated with the lack of interest on the part of property developers who only seem to want markers or plops, he calls them plops, in front of their buildings that may be aesthetically pleasing, but have no conceptual base or intellectual value. Now, nothing gives the artist greater pleasure than giving the audience the power to decide for themselves what they are observing or experiencing in the presence of his sculptures. He would love for people to really take their time and read the text. So let's look at what the text reads. From one narrative to the next, followed by moments of equilibrium. If not tomorrow, tomorrow. Slowly, surely disappearing. Lucky enough to fly into the flame, with lucky stricken out. So the title is Artifacts of Memory, and maybe the artist is trying to materialize the passage of time. And that theme will continue in the next piece. The scale and the shape of the sculpture invites you to walk under it and maybe take some time to think about your own life. These days, we're all living a bit more in our heads and perhaps looking more closely at our lives, especially how they were before the pandemic, and our desire, if not tomorrow, tomorrow, for a return to a life that seems to be more of a memory. And I'm going to play you another interview with the artist. Oh, first here is another shot of the sculpture and the text that appears. Okay.
Text within the city is a slightly different consideration too. I mean, that's another subset of public art, using text in the kind of urban environment, because most of the text within the urban environment commands you, tells you what not to do, tells you what to do, right?
Right.
And so this text is not of that nature. It doesn't tell you to buy anything either, right? You're not selling. You're using it in a poetic sense. I was really proud of the one in the Riverdale one where I used Heraclitus on the bridge, right? Where this river I step in is not the river I stand in, which is a rewrite of Heraclitus. They can't step twice into the same river, okay? But further down in the same sculpture, in the Jimmy Simpson Park, there's 5 pennants.
Yep.
And in that, one of the pennants is the word returning. To me, that was bringing Nietzsche into the city, right? I was actually using quotes from the Perpetual Return of Nietzsche and putting it on this kind of piece about time, right? And I was really proud to have philosophical notions enter into the domain of public art.
Well, I guess I've given away what the final piece is, and it's probably his most well-known piece. I wish I could sort of put it out to you to guess what it is, because most of you Torontonians will be very familiar with this piece, called Time and a Clock, 1995. It's part of a bridge on Queen Street going over the River Don. And there it is. So, as I said, this is probably his most well-known piece, and I'd love to know how many of you even knew who the artist was, and of course now you do. And of course the text that is so in your face when you go over the bridge reads, "This river I step in is not the river I stand in. And as I said, like the last sculpture is about the passage of time, quote from the Greek philosopher Heraclitus. So it's kind of ironic that, crossing the bridge prevents us from actually stepping in or standing in the River Don. There are steps on the right side of the bridge to take you to the footpath below, but it's actually pretty tricky to get into the River Don. As a further interpretation, do we fully experience something when we are in motion compared to stopping and giving ourselves a moment to be? The plaque reads here, "The Riverside Gateway Project is a legacy project inspired by the city's participation in the 2015 Para-Pan Am Games." Now, I believe this plaque is referring to the installation of the colored lights on the bridge that are lit up at night. And there are 3 artists credited: Eldon, Garnet, Rebecca J. Houston, and Nicholas Chin. So next I'm going to play you a final clip of where Garnet talks about the broad reach of public art, and at the same time, ironically, feeling rather unknown.
Oh yeah, no, I think that piece is totally appreciated because it's become part of the community. It's become the logo. The piece on the bridge has become a logo for the community in a sense, and you can buy it on a T-shirt. You can get it on calendars, postcards.
What did you think of that?
I get no royalties for it.
Oh, okay.
It's a different question, but it really is part of the community, right? And even when I was actually spending a lot of time in that area near the pennants, they would hang banners on the pennants, right? During their festivals and things like that.
And you didn't object to that, unlike Michael Snow and the red bows on the...
Of course I did, but I would just go down to the local office and say, "You got to take this down."
Okay.
It's like, the trouble is it does mar the piece.
Yeah.
So, by the way, my reference there to Michael Snow is his famous sculpture in the Eaton Center with the geese flight stop, where one Christmas the property developers put red bows around these geese, which did not impress Michael Snow. So, missed one there. I just wanted to, thanks, Wes. I just wanted to show also the installation in front of Jimmy Simpson Park, which he referred to. There's actually this piece here, which is the 4 banners, and that's what he was talking about, that because sometimes there's art festivals in Jimmy Simpson Park, and that they hung banners or something from these. There's also another installation right on the 4 corners of Queen and Broadview that are etched right into the sidewalk. So if you do go to Queen and Broadview area, you'll get to see 3 Eldon Garnets: the bridge, the text on the 4 corners of Queen and Broadview, and these banners right in front of Jimmy Simpson Park. And that is where he's making reference to the returning banner, which is his Nietzsche reference. And he also mentions the reference to how this particular project has been so popularized as to be the subjects in calendars, postcards, and T-shirts. I found this one. This is the last slide of the presentation. After this, I'll see if there's any questions. But I really wanted to finish by saying, first of all, thank you to Wes for helping me, and thank you for attending this. But also, I hope alongside the fact that you now know who he is, that this presentation will maybe make you more aware of public art, because Toronto has some amazing public art. And it's not just downtown. And in fact, he does have another piece in Mississauga, I believe, on Near Ontario. That's the only other one in Toronto that I know of. but just to notice these pieces. There's lots of them in the distillery district, in the financial district, in many, many neighborhoods of downtown Toronto. So so thank you very much, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. One of them being, are there any notable works of his that Canadians should know about? Well, as I said, if you go on his website, eldongarnet.com, you'll see a full list of all his works. The ones that I showed are the most notable sculptures in Toronto, but he is a photographer and a writer, and so yeah, eldongarnet.com. So you can look up, really the breadth, to see the breadth of his work, because he's really quite amazing, and he's been at this for a long time. So yeah, it's worth having a look. Question from Bev: why did I pick him? Is his art more intellectual and thought-provoking than most in Toronto? Yes, great question, Bev Biederman, and that's probably why I did pick him, because I've gone over that bridge a million times and I've always wondered what it meant. And then the more I looked into him, the more I realized that he's really a very cerebral artist who puts so much thought into his work, and I really wanted to find out more about him. And then I kept discovering more and more pieces around the city, and they just kind of cumulatively made me more and more interested in him. So yes, thought-provoking for sure. Thanks for that question. I think that's all the questions I've got. So once again, thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you enjoyed this short little virtual walk of Eldon Garnet's sculpture. And I will say thank you and goodbye.